We're joined now by Jamil Jaffer, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University. Jamil has served in a number of senior national security roles in the U.S. government, including as an associate counsel to President George W. Bush. Jamil, we appreciate your time this morning. What do you think the end goal is of the Trump administration when it comes to Iran?
Well, it looks like the end goal is clearly to have an Iran that is willing to operate in the world, operate in the region in an appropriate manner, not support terrorism, and not build a nuclear weapon. And so that's the key goal. Whether we're able to achieve that with the current regime in place is a different question. And whether they'll take this opportunity, their nuclear sites haven't been struck, to not strike back, but instead negotiate a middle ground solution is the key question in play today, Tom.
What do you expect the Iranian response will be, given your experience focused on this region?
Look, I can't see a world in which the Iranians don't respond in some way with an offensive strike against the United States. The reality, though, is that while they might hit U.S. forces in the region or try to use cyber capabilities or more likely use a terrorist attack against American interests either in the region or in Europe or in the United States, any one of those is likely to be met with a stiff response by the United States. You saw what Vice President J.D. Vance just said. We've seen President Trump say the same thing. The Secretary of Defense essentially highlighted the exact same thing as well. And so it's going to be very unlikely that if they strike back, the U.S. won't respond in a significant way, particularly if Americans are killed. The Iranians saw what happened when they hit Americans in Jordan with the killing of Qasem Soleimani. They ought to be warned about what could come next.
How realistic do you think it is that military action can resolve the question around Iran's nuclear facilities, given that we have 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium? We don't know the location of that now. It seems at least the US and Israel don't know the location. They have the ability, of course, to build centrifuges, and they've said that they have an enrichment facility somewhere in Iran. Is it realistic to think that military action alone can remove the nuclear threat from Iran?
Well, look, maybe not this military action alone, but certainly over the long run, that can be part of the solution. But you're right. We don't know what we don't know. There may very well be facilities. There almost certainly are facilities in Iran that have nuclear dimensions to them that we have not yet located, not yet struck. That's going to be part of the challenge. To your point, there's all this enriched uranium that's about 60% that might be enriched to weapons grade as well. We need to figure out where that is and extract that. Part of the problem here is that we've allowed Iran to have an enrichment program for so long. You know, we didn't even let our allies, the United Arab Emirates, conduct a nuclear enrichment program. We told them, you want the gold standard, we'll give you enriched uranium if you want to build a civilian program. The idea that back in 2015, the Obama administration would allow and enter into a deal where the Iranians got to keep a nuclear enrichment program is a core part of this problem. It's why President Trump walked away from that JCPOA deal. It's part of why we're here where we are today.
Well, the counter to that would be that the JCPOA, so the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, kept a cap on enrichment, kept a cap on Iran's abilities to build towards a nuclear weapon more effectively than the military action has so far been from Israel and the US.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Tom. That is the core of the debate. The problem, of course, with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is it would have expired in 2025, so we'd be at the expiration of it right now. But even beyond that, it allowed Iran to continue to also develop advanced centrifuge capacity. It also allowed them to continue to build ballistic missiles, which it didn't even have restrictions on. In fact, removed some restrictions on. And perhaps worst of all, it didn't even touch the question of Iran's terrorism around the region. So if you're going to solve the Iran problem, nuclear enrichment is one piece of it. Weaponization is another. Ballistic missiles are a third. And over all of this, Iran's support for Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, these are things that have to be dealt with comprehensively. Unless you demonstrate to Iran you're willing to go up against them directly, as we have now, it's unlikely they're going to put any of that on the table.
Jamil, you've recently suggested that the US should take action to potentially support regime change in Iran. How widely held is that view now within the security apparatus of Washington? To paraphrase President Macron, have we not learned the lessons of Iraq, of Libya?
No, it's a great point, and I think the really important point here is if there's going to be regime change, it can't come from the outside. It can't come with the U.S. coming in and removing the leadership of Iran. It's got to come from the Iranian people. But we know that over half the Iranian population is under the age of 40. We know that 80% of the population does not support their current leadership. They don't like that brutal dictatorship. If they choose to rise up, it's incumbent upon us to support them. We saw the Green Revolution under President Obama. We didn't support them when we had the opportunity. Now's our chance. The Israelis clearly have strong supply lines into Iran to get capabilities in, as we saw on these earlier strikes. So if we can use those supply lines to supply weapons, capabilities, communications gear and the like to the Iranian people, if they want to rise up, we should enable that to happen. We don't need to do it ourselves. We don't need to pick the next leader of Iran. That's for the Iranian people.
Jamil Jaffer, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University.